Hello everyone. Good morning and good evening wherever you are. Today we are here with another set of podcasts. Primary reason for this topic is, we wanted to make sure that people understand different post-merger integration challenges and key strategy for how to make them successful. So today's topic we have chosen about mastering post-acquisition integration. Key strategy for success. We have our guest here, Karan. Karan is VP Corporate Development in Progress, based out of US. And Karan, over to you. We have audience who are looking to, understand more about these challenges, how and some of your learning, what you'd like to share. So over to you. If you can just introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure, I'd love to. And thank you, Dharmendra. I appreciate you inviting me and being here today. Hello, everyone. As Dharmendra said, I'm Karen Williams. I'm with Progress, Vice President of Corporate Development with responsibility for the integration of acquisitions. So I've been doing M&A, probably living in this world for well more than 20 years. Don't want to date myself too much, but it's been really cut my teeth. I've sat on both sides of the fence, both having been an acquired employee a couple of times in my career, as well as leading the integration of acquisitions with Progress's total growth strategy, with a primary focus on growth through acquisitions and doubling the size of our business every 4 to 5 years. The success of our acquisitions and the integration is critical, and I'm thrilled to be able to work on that and have an impact on the business with the Progress team.
Thanks, Karan. So what we have done is based on your expertise and the topic. I know the topic is quite big. There are so many things within post-merger integration. So we have simplified list of questions which come from a different audience we collected. And the first question to you is, what are the key stages of post-merger integration and why post-merger integration is challenging for any firm? So we know that post-merger integration, whenever we talk, we start with the problem, right? It's difficult for the company. Most of the company go through this stuff, challenging to integrate two companies. So I wanted to know your view. What are the different stages of PMI and why PMI is so challenging for any company you might have seen?
Sure. So, it's interesting. We call it post-merger integration or PMI, but the reality is it starts much, much earlier in the deal life cycle.
Yeah.
Really, you should be thinking about your post-merger integration starting with diligence. It's really important, I believe, that your integration team, and particularly your integration leader, is involved in the diligence process from the get-go. Because the better understanding you have of the business and the potential target at the early stages, you can really start formulating those thoughts and plans as you learn about the business during diligence. So while diligence is critical for the deal process and determining if you want to move forward and are there any red flags or any things that change the valuation of the opportunity, it's also important to put an operational lens on the business, because in order to ensure you can meet your goals and objectives and your financial targets, you need to understand how are you going to operate this business. And that starts with diligence, and that starts your post-merger integration planning process. So I'd say that's the first critical stage. You go through diligence. As you move through and you go through diligence and you determine you're going to be you think successful outcome is a possibility here, you really start pivoting your team to go from diligence as you're finalizing the deal, SPA, or depending on how the deal is structured, you will move and pivot to what I refer to as sign/close readiness, because it all depends on whether you're going to have a simultaneous sign and close, or if you're going to have a waiting period for HSR approvals, or what may happen between that sign and close period. But you really start pivoting your team to plan. So how are you going to hit the ground running? How are you going to capture the heart and minds of the employees, ensure you've connected with partners, vendors,
Mhm.
all key stakeholders and press analysts, in that process. So I refer to that as your close ready sign/close readiness. And then from there, you're looking at what does that first week to 30 days look like, right? Because that's typically a really chaotic period. Employees have a ton of me questions. What's going to happen? And the me questions are the first and foremost on their mind. Do I have a job? What about my benefits? What's my pay cycle going to be like? Is my bonus structure going to change? My variable pay going to change? All of those me questions are first and foremost on an employee's mind. Customers want to know, are you going to change the product? Are you going to end of service, end of life any products that the company may have? What about the product roadmap that have been previously communicated? So providing those assurances and demonstrating to the market through press and analysts how the power of the two companies together, the combined power, is greater than either alone is really key. So that first 30 days, so I always work with our team to chunk up the integration planning into that first 30 days and that first 30 to 60, 90, 100 days. That's what we typically refer to as the heavy lifting period, right? This is where you're onboarding employees, you're doing all those outreaches to your stakeholder communities, you're doing some of your preliminary early wins from an integration standpoint, email access, collaboration tools, how are you going to work together? And you're really digging in and at a detail level now, validating your preliminary integration plans. So that's really the heavy lifting period. And then once you get past that first 100 days, and I'll say typically, although I find no deal is typical, but once you get first 100 days or so, it is what you turn into is that business as usual or operational, truly operationalizing the business. And how are you going to reach your end state vision for the integration of this particular acquisition? And what does that look like? And this includes your long pole items, a lot of your systems and IT integration and migrations. What are you doing with your entity, the legal entities that you've now acquired, IP, are there mergers or transfers that have to occur, any real estate consolidation, et cetera. That tends to be your long pole. And that takes you through your first year. And that's sort of how I look at the stages of the integration process. That's not to say there aren't some real long pole items that trail beyond that first 12 months. But generally speaking, you want to have it pretty locked and loaded in that first 12 months.
Yeah. So you spoke about, communication, when two companies are integrating with each other. We understand that communication is, often is very emphasized during the post-merger integration. Maybe if you can give some of the, your view of why effective communication is so critical, and maybe if you can share some of the best practices so that we can keep all the stakeholders, either they could be external, could be internal, how to engage them, how to make sure they are informed.
Absolutely. So you've hit a passion topic for me because I think communication is one of the key success factors for an acquisition. What I find is many companies, and having worked with many companies in my career, both as an employee and as a consultant, many companies come out of the gate strong on communication, right? They've got a really robust sign, announce, close communication strategy and plan. They come out of the gate strong, maybe have really wonderful day one event or week one events planned for the employee base, a whole press and analyst tour. They, white glove onboarding of customers, reaching out, particularly as you look at your different cohorts of customers. But then often it peters out. And what happens is if you go dark, people will assume the worst, right? Once in absence of information, and particularly in an employee base, this is where rumors will start to swirl around, and you will then be in a position of, instead of proactively managing the dialogue, reacting to those concerns and rumors. So really, and not only coming out the gate strong, but what I always say is maintaining the drumbeat throughout the life cycle of the integration process is key. You can do this in many ways. And it's really, my experience is the best approach is a push-pull program where you're sharing information, but you're also making information available. So some of the things that we've done that I really do consider best practice and we've baked into our playbook, because with every deal, we try something different and new, and depending on the results, we'll work that in and we do a retrospective. So for example, when we sign a deal, even if we have that waiting period between sign and close, we will create an external portal that is available to the employees, only to the employees, so they can access information, almost like a mini intranet. We then port that over to our intranet once we hit close, and we continue to use that to post information, share slides, recordings, training, enablement that is dedicated and geared to the acquired employees in the first year of the acquisition. It's a centralized resource for them. Another great tool is an acquisition newsletter. And the newsletters, what's really important is it's not just focused on the integration of the acquisition, but also on the business. And by that I mean is when you think about it, typically when you do an acquisition, oftentimes that company might be smaller in size than the one doing the acquiring. And what happens is employees are typically used to understanding what's happening across the business, what's happening in sales, what's happening in marketing. Hey, so-and-so just had a great meeting with an analyst and they, posted something in Slack or Teams, that kind of a thing. And employees start to lose that connection as they become integrated into the broader business and into maybe their functional areas, depending on how you organize. So highlighting the business and successes and wins in the business, as well as what you're hearing in the market, in addition to integration, is key. A couple of other things we've done that have really made their way into our playbook for best practices is with a recent acquisition, they already had a culture. So making sure you look at the acquired team's culture, how do they communicate? How do they interact and engage? And this team had a culture of having a weekly meeting, all company meeting where they'd have different topics. So we rebranded this meeting as we called it Knowledge Thursdays, right? So it was on every Thursday at the same time. And in the first set of meetings, what we did is we used this to share information about the organization, about progress. We did product demos to give them exposure to the different tooling and capabilities that we had across the organization, shared with them how they could access those and start to use them and learn about them. We also then dedicated once a month to an integration update. And we do an all hands where we'd provide an integration update and really leaving ample time for Q&A. The other thing I want to stress, because I could go on and on about communication, but the other thing I really want to stress is the importance of transparency. Being as transparent with the employee base, your customers, the market as you can. Now, obviously, there's things you can't always share. And it's also okay, particularly with your employees, to say when you don't know yet, we're still figuring it out, and to share that with them. And the last thing on this topic I'll say is it's really important to follow through. Don't say you're going to do something and not do it. Actions speak louder than words, and that's a critical form of communication. And if you commit or say you're going to do something or say you're going to do something by a certain date, make sure you follow through.
So I think I have a similar experience what you mentioned about communication, making sure that we set up intranet site where, all the communication date, what is communicated is also shared with everyone, like what is happening, like updates on acquisition, right? And also the deck which is presented by executive committee, they are updating something that will also be stored. Some video, maybe some town hall meetings. I think these are some of the best practices we also follow. So I think
you hit a great note too. The communication, I was talking about all your stakeholder communities, and I probably missed a big chunk there, which is your steering committee, which is, depending on your organization, your board of directors. It is also your integration team. And so establishing that sort of governance structure early, very, very early on, directly as you get almost right before signs, as you're getting close to, the deal closing, getting that in place and really ensuring that you have effective and consistent communication to all of those stakeholders as well as key.
Right. So
yeah, you're right.
I think, So, now we move to more about culture side. So culture also, that any deal you do, while we do integration, much before integration, you start thinking about culture. So cultural differences can play a very significant role in success or failure of a merger. That's what we read everywhere, right? How, you think that organization can navigate cultural challenge, whatever challenges they have, and how they can create a cohesive company culture after the integration? What are the right time to think about culture integration plans and how to put our strategy? So this is basic, if I sum up this question, is more about, your experience about how culture harmonization you did, right? And how we make sure that company is making a cohesive company culture after the integration is done, or while you are doing the integration.
So another passion topic of mine, and really goes hand in hand with the communication, because the reality is, particularly in a technology company like Progress software company, yes, you're acquiring IP and a customer base, but it's the people, right, who make the business run, who create the software, service it, support it, sell it. So culture is key. We really start, and to go back to the deal life cycle, this starts during diligence. One of the things that we will do during diligence is a pretty thorough assessment of culture. And this generally is not to say, are we going to do a deal or not do a deal? Culture typically isn't going to sway whether we do a deal, or I think at most companies, but understanding where you have similarities or gaps or differences is really important and will inform your integration plan. So one of the reasons you got to start in diligence, you're starting to think about integration, right? If we're thinking we're going to make some changes very quickly out of the gate, how adept is the organization, the leadership to help drive those, and the employee base to accept them or manage them and absorb that, right? So starting that process and looking at it from a leadership perspective, a change readiness perspective. What are the motivational drivers and values of the business? Understanding all of those different pieces. So we actually do a dedicated session for around culture, looking at culture and asking and inquiring a lot about culture. Of course, anything you learn during diligence has to be validated post-close, right? Companies understandably are putting their best foot forward. So you don't always hear about the challenges they may have internally, from a culture perspective, but having that baseline understanding and then developing some early mitigation plans. The key is your HR and people team don't own culture. That is owned by every single person participating in the deal process, right? In the acquisition. So as you're engaging with management and you're in those management meetings, is even looking at the information that's provided in a BDR and how is it organized? How is it documented? That tells you something about the culture. Looking at sort of the geographic landscape of, do they have a presence in a geography or a country where you don't today? Educating yourself on the norms and expectations of that culture are really important. Communication style, we talked about that previously, and understanding how they do things today, and what of those could you adopt or bring in as best practices into your organization as appropriate. All of those pieces are key. And The other important factor is to remember culture doesn't begin and end. It's an ongoing evolution. So you're never
Exactly.
done. You
Yeah.
might do this baseline assessment, understanding, develop some
Mhm.
mitigation plans, but you continually have to revisit it based on your
Of
learnings and
course.
your engagement with
Mhm.
the acquired base, the employee base, and their customers. That'll
Yeah.
tell you about something about the customers too. What do they use from in the culture from a community forum perspective? How do
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
engage with customers? How accessible are they? Those kinds of
Mhm.
things will inform the culture.
Right. So, your key takeaway is culture is never going to end. You just start from,
No.
before buying the company, the whole integration. And HR is just facilitator. It's not the owners of culture, right? It's driven from all the businesses.
Totally agree. I would never minimize the role that HR or your people
Right.
team plays in this,
Right.
because it's true, but they are facilitators and they are
Mhm.
guides through the process. Exactly.
So now we will move on and talk more on the business side of it. So,
Yeah.
financial and operational synergies are often, driving factors behind any merger. How
Mhm.
can organization effectively identify, quantify, and realize those synergies during the whole integration process? I know this is, it's a long journey, synergy identification, but I wanted to learn more from you for our audience. If you can share some of your experience about
Yeah.
whole
This
synergy
is
process.
This is a tough one. This is a tough one, as you and
Yeah,
I
this is the toughest
previously
one.
talked about, because you may during diligence, you will
Mhm.
start defining and identifying those potential synergies. Do you use the same vendors? Are contract terms preferable? Are your contract terms preferable or are theirs? And you can
Mhm.
work to consolidate contracts. Are you going to replace and take out some any systems, technology, tooling that are used today
Mhm.
that maybe you have a replacement for that is more cost effective? Or do they have one that is better
Mhm.
than what you've got? And does the
Right.
acquired company, it can go both ways. And that's important
Mhm.
to remember through the process. So you identify the potential targets for synergies during diligence. And you're always thinking about how can you fit into that financial envelope then, right? What is it, the business
Mhm.
case you're signing up for here? But the reality is those are levers, because once you get into an acquisition and you close the deal, you'll learn some new things. So that envelope never changes, but
Mhm.
how you might get there might change
Yeah.
a little, right? And those are
Mhm.
levers. So it's challenging that it's my experience is there's really no companies that are great at able to systematically track this, right?
Yeah.
So manual intervention is required a
Mhm.
bit, and that's a
Yeah.
challenge. So it a lot of it's going to depend on how your company is structured and how they track their financial metrics today. And what do you do? I mean, one option that I've done in
Mhm.
companies before is ring fencing that acquisition in the first 12 months so
Yeah.
that you are truly able to track the expenses. And if the expectation was that you were going to take out some expenses from an operational standpoint, ring fencing it is going to give you your cleanest way. But it's tough because what you then miss are those crossovers where you consolidated an
Yeah.
agreement and now
Mhm.
maybe expenses are flowing to another part of the business or something. So the other option to augment it, if you're not able to ring fence, is to really establish a method and a model for tracking this with each of your functional teams and particularly your operational G&A teams, which
Mhm.
is most common where you'll see opportunities for some
Yeah.
cost synergies in an acquisition,
Yeah.
is really to start that process of manually tracking it. It can be a bit arduous and it can be tough for companies to adopt because they're not used to doing it. So
Mhm.
anything
Yeah.
outside the norm and outside your standard processes
Yeah.
like this
Mhm.
can present a challenge. But in the end, the data you'll get from it is so valuable, not only to
Mhm.
say, did we realize our synergies and our financial targets, but also to say, okay, if we look at another deal of a similar profile, what do we think we could realistically achieve based on what we've done in the past? If you're a serial acquirer, building that history is really great information to have.
So, now come to my, I think another question which I had was more on customer experience. So always we have seen that how company can ensure that whenever merger, happens, it should not have any negative impact on the customer. So what are some of the key steps taken to maintain a high level of service during the transition phase? So when we are just acquiring a company and we have started the integration, customer experience, have to be maintained. So what is your view on that? How currently, you think that some of the best practices, if you'd like to share with us?
So with customer experience, I mean, again, the planning for that starts in the very beginning, and they're one of your key stakeholders that we talked about throughout this sort of discussion. We talked about in communication, we talked about in cultural differences, right? So really, and when you think about the financial and operational measures that we were just talking about, you're usually ARR, revenue, customer retention are all usually critical measures you'll have there, right? So customer experience, I think one of the things is looking at the customer base and how are they organized and how are they structured, and how does it maybe differ from your current customer base, or where are there overlaps and synergies? And where there's overlaps and positive synergies, are the things you're doing today as best practices. For example, does the acquired team not have a formalized customer success program? Is that something you can open up and make available to the incoming customer base? And maybe do it on a trial basis for your top tier customers at no charge, so they understand what's involved and the level of service they'd be able to get from that. The other thing is looking at your customer base and customer retention measures and say, what can we do from an outreach program? So one of the things that I've certainly done in past acquisitions is work with our support and customer success and executives teams to do what I refer to as a white glove onboarding process. So establish a program where you have executive sponsors or leaders assigned to top X customers, and you can figure that cohort out based on the base itself and the company. And you do an outreach. The executive will reach out, introduce themselves, make themselves available for initial questions and stuff. And it's a way of building that bond, creating that transparency that we talked about in the communication process, instilling confidence that when you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. So that's one, best practice that I've certainly leveraged in the past. The other important piece is, so often companies, when they do an acquisition, really focus on the financial measures, right? Again, revenue, customer retention, ARR, operating margin, and those are all important. But those are basic, right? You're always going to measure those. It also is really helpful to establish some measures around customer success and the health of the business. So doing something like a dashboard that would have, NPS, customer sat, time on hold. If this acquisition is going to have major changes to its support process or support workflow, are you tracking the right and measuring the right key points to know how is that happening in the health of the business, and get those early signs, early warnings, indicators of potential churn and risk of customers, right? Or impact to your NPS, so you can be looking at how does it go up. So if there isn't an existing customer sat or an NPS program, putting them in place, establishing them, looking again at your best practices. I think that there's many different levers you can pull on the customer experience side. It's really a matter of the base and your organization and how it's structured, which ones you pull and utilize.
So, some of communications are very key whenever, a new deal is going to be announced. How quickly, customer is aware, right? What is happening, why this acquisitions. Maybe, I'm not sure whether we send the basic initial deck after deal is announced to potential customers, like this is the acquisition we are doing, this is going to happen, maybe some informations.
Yeah, that's another great one. I mean, definitely
Mhm.
customers are a common or a consistent track, not common,
Yeah,
consistent track
consistent.
in
Yeah.
your communication program, right?
Mhm.
It's outreach and customer relation management. Whenever you're making change, that will impact them, right? How you communicate. You're gonna have those typical milestones if you're assigning the customer contracts to,
Mhm.
depending on what you're doing with the entities, and from a legal perspective, if you're making changes to the invoicing and billing process or remittance bank accounts, all the, you have those tactical operational
Right.
communications, but
Mhm.
it's important at the beginning where you're communicating to them on the acquisition, why you did this, why you're so excited about it. Another tool to use is webinars, customer webinars, where you're giving them
Yeah.
updates along the way, right? The
Yeah.
other thing is establishing or utilize, if there's an existing one, excuse me,
Mhm.
community forum for your
Yeah.
customer base. How do you leverage that? And if there isn't one, look at establishing one, right? That you can create a more two-way dialogue with your customers and
Mhm.
give them a forum and an opportunity to ask questions and share information on what they're learning,
Yeah.
how they're using your products.
Right.
Can really
Mhm.
help you from a use case perspective.
Right.
So all of those things are great
Mhm.
levers in your arsenal.
Yeah. Exactly. Thanks. I think this is a very important point.
I agree.
Another question which I had in
I'm
this
sorry.
context is,
Can I just jump back to that for a second? Because I thought of something else that when you just said it's a really important one that I wanted to emphasize is, what's really important too is the focus on customers is not just the customers you're acquiring, but
yeah,
your current customer base.
current
And that the
customers. Yeah.
integration of the
Mhm.
acquisition doesn't become such a distraction that you don't maintain the high satisfaction customer retention of your
Right.
current base. That business continuity for all aspects of the business or the organization are critical. Sorry,
Mhm.
when you said that word, it triggered the thought for me and I wanted to go back to it.
Yeah. No. Good. So, I came to my last question to you, Karen.
Sure.
So basically, measurement and evaluation are vital to track the success of post-merger integration. So what are some KPI generally you track, like as an organization you monitor, and how they adjust their strategy based on feedback you receive?
So this is great. This sort of builds off the
Yeah.
last one we were just talking about. You're certainly going to have your financial KPIs and measures.
Right.
And then we talked about and then to me, the other ones, it's really about the health scorecard of the business and the
Yeah.
acquired business and ensuring integration and the acquisition itself isn't such a distraction, that you're on track, and you're also on track to realize your business case and the
Mhm.
strategic rationale, not only the financial targets, but the strategic rationale and your strategic goals and objectives. So defining those up
Mhm.
front, even before you close the acquisition, is really important because that'll drive some of the measures that you put in place and the KPIs that you use, right? We talked about many of the customer ones. You're going to track churn, you're going to track support calls, NPS, customer sat. You want to track employee ones, right?
Mhm.
Retention of
Yeah.
employees, voluntary resignations
Mhm.
are, the other thing that we do, and I highly recommend, is surveys to the employee base during the integration, whether it be separate and distinct surveys, or if you have an overall engagement survey that you can do a separate track for the acquired employees, and understanding, are the employees engaged? How are they responding?
Mhm.
Anonymous is key, so they have the
Yeah.
opportunity to really share what they're thinking and what's
Mhm.
on their mind.
Mhm.
Um, But if you do the surveys, it's really important that you share those results with the employee base. And you share what actions may be taken with the employee base, right? Because the last thing you want is that's going on deaf ears. The other thing that's really important is around customer acquisition. Depending on what your revenue targets are and your potential growth opportunities are, then are you looking at customer acquisition, website visits, your marketing programs, demand and cost, looking at your, cost to acquire a customer, all of those different pieces and measures. And then, of course, you always want to be looking at and tracking from a product standpoint, roadmap commitments, defects, quality of the releases. Are they sustained or improving as you go, right? So there's many different KPIs and those leading indicators you can bring into this dashboard or scorecard. The importance is tying them back to what your strategic rationale is and your goals and objectives for the acquisition. And then you'll have a balanced scorecard.
Yeah. So thanks for your time, and thanks for giving so much, of your know-how, and also some of the best practices you shared. When I was doing deal, I also, share the same kind of lesson learned and best practices and share among team members. So I think, those are very helpful for our audience. And I know everyone who is doing M&A integration, they go through the similar kind of challenge. So for them, these are very good takeaway. And I thank you for your time. And for our audience, we are going to come back another session where we'll bring another topic based on your whatever requests we keep getting. We try to bring those topics, try to bring our speakers who share their expertise so that we can learn from each other. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.